There were definitely moments last year where it felt like a failure, but man, the more time I have to reflect on it, the more things I feel like I learned from it and how I can use those tools to better my next trip or my next ambition or my next year.
Hey y'all, I'm Ryan Devlin and welcome to the Struggle Climbing Show, where I talk with elite climbers about their struggles and breakthroughs in training, nutrition, tactics, and mental game. And today, you guys, we are welcoming back to the show one of the hardest working and most accomplished sport climbers in the game, Jonathan Siegrist. And while no doubt J-Star has had his fair share of incredible accomplishments in this sport, today's conversation is equally focused on the non-send, the X instead of the green check mark, the failures, if you will. Or are they failures? And where do we draw the line between success and failure? And how do we use those experiences to then propel ourselves forward in whatever goals we have as climbers? This conversation first catches us up on a huge life decision that Jonathan and his new wife, Shayna, had made last year that didn't work out the way that they had planned, which is an apt jumping off point for our exploration here of what happens when ambition and expectation don't match the outcome in climbing and in life in general. Last year was a really hard year for Jonathan, as he shares with us, and I think we can all relate to that. I certainly can relate to having hard years or hard periods in climbing and in life, and I just really enjoyed this conversation as he opened up fully about those ups and downs last year and where he is now with them. And then we get really specific and we look at two mega projects that J-Star has taken on over the years. One that he managed to put together in a fairy tale fashion. Oh my gosh, I love that story so much that he shares. And then one that he's continued to try and that has continued to elude him up to this point, but one that he's going to get back to this summer. So another chapter has yet to be written on that one. This interview came to me just when I needed it, y'all. I am deep into my longest project ever, and whether you're new to the projecting process or have had some mega days or years into something yourself, there's going to be a lot of relatable, inspiring, and just downright practical things that you take away from this chat with one of the hardest working climbers in the sport. Let's go. So I mentioned there for a second my own journey into mega project land, and I guess I'm due for a little bit of an update here. For those of you who have been following along, I'm going to do a full Road to 13A episode here soon, again with Eric Hurst, but the Cliff Notes version of where I'm at is that I felt very close to putting together my 13A, the Force, late last year, kind of winter into the spring season here, but I couldn't get the stars to align. My high point was a few moves from the chains. But to be fair, those few moves are like the red point crux. So honestly, it's hard to know exactly how close I was, but it felt damn close. I mean, there's just no doubt that I am in the absolute best climbing shape of my life. I'm 44 years old. I'm climbing harder than I've ever climbed. I'm training harder than I've ever trained. And I feel awesome. I'm powering through the hardest sections consistently on that route, sections that were crazy hard for me when I started doing it. I couldn't even do the moves. And I'm recovering well. I'm moving with pretty good flow. I mean, I think I could definitely improve in my technique, and there's definitely some more fitness I can build. But I'm really proud. I'm really proud of the progress that I have made, and I'm still super, super hyped on this project. I love it so much. But I think at this point, it's going to have to wait until the fall because warm temperatures have rolled into the red a little bit sooner than I had hoped, and I'm also kind of nursing a little bit of a tweak in my hand. So, I think it's time to tuck into some serious training now, which I'm super hyped for. I love going into a training block. So I'm going to dive into some weight training, a very focused weight training block for a bit, and then also just have some fun out at the red, some maximal climbing days, build up my pyramid in the kind of 11s and 12s. I was just out there this past weekend with my daughter and another family. I had a blast doing laps on some mid 11s. And I'm excited for that season. I'll share more about my training plan and everything that I'm doing on Instagram and with these little mini updates here on the podcast. So if you care to follow along, you can do that. And I hope your training and your climbing are going awesome as well. This episode is supported by Maxim Ropes, and if you take as many whips as I do, you want to be sure that your rope is amazing, and I'm telling you guys, my Airliner is hands down the nicest rope that I have ever tied into. The 9.1 millimeter Maxim airliner is an ultralight and skinny lead line, but that featherweight doesn't sacrifice an ounce of performance, y'all. It is frequently referred to as the indestructible airliner due to its longevity, which is awesome for a few reasons. First, peace of mind. So, I mean, real talk here, I struggle with fear of falling, and I just want full confidence that my rope has got me, and the airliner, which is triple certified, goes above and beyond in that department. I love it. And then second, I don't want to have to shell out for a new rope every season. They're expensive, and Maxim goes the distance here, which also means that it has a smaller impact on our environment, which is really cool. And then lastly, the airliner is so light, it makes the approach a breeze. It feeds through my gear incredibly smoothly, so I can save all of that energy to flail around on my project. Not Maxim's fault, but I'm working on it. So if you're looking for a super lightweight, ultra thin, and extremely durable cord, you have found it. Check it out at your local gear shop or online. And you can see all of the ropes that Maxim has to offer by hitting that link in your show notes there or popping over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/Maxim. This episode is supported by Physivantage, the official climbing nutrition sponsor of The Struggle. And let me tell you guys why I love Physivantage. Yes, their stuff is the best of the best when it comes to supporting my goals as a climber. But beyond that, y'all, I just love that this company was created by climbers for climbers and is an active member in the climbing community. Physivantage founder and legendary coach Eric Hurst, who's been on the show a million times with me here, he's been giving back to our community as an author, a route developer, and a coach for decades now. And he created Physivantage to bring the best science-backed nutrition to our sport so that we can all perform at our best. And when I see crushers like Alex Magos, Daniel Woods, Amity Warm, Jonathan Siegrist, Natalia Grossman, and so many more using Physivantage every day, well, that is a pretty damn good endorsement. And speaking personally, I'm training harder than I ever have, and I have never felt better, you guys. I use their supercharged collagen and their Powerplex protein every single day to support my training and my recovery. It is crazy delicious, and most importantly, it works. Plus, Eric is hooking you all up with a sick deal just for listening to The Struggle here. You can hit that link in your podcast app or use checkout code STRUGGLE15 to save 15% off any full-price nutrition order over at physivantage.com. Lastly, just a huge thanks to all you patrons and subscribers out there. I just released a beta-packed bonus episode with J-Star just for you, and I'm going to tell you more about that in a little bit here. But first, let's explore success, failure, and the gray area in between with Jonathan Siegrist. It was cool to be able to see you for like a hot second a few weeks ago when I was in town too, you know, in the garage there. And you were training hard as you tend to do and right about to head out to Texas. And it looks like you were trying hard out there too with a headlamp on at nighttime. So maybe that's a good place for us to start is just kind of what was going down in Texas and how did that trip turn out for you?
Yeah, man, for sure. So yeah, and it was nice to see you. The winter time in general, I would say, you know, Thanksgiving until basically the end of March is always just nuts here because we've got so many people coming through town and traveling for climbing. And it's like we always have people coming and going, staying here and whatever. So it's always a bit of a frenzy, but it's awesome to be able to see folks like you just like, you know, jump through for a couple of days or stay for a few weeks or whatever. But yeah, I spent most of so I got back I was in France last year for 6 months, and I got back from that trip at the end of November. And then I did some family stuff in December, but I was training quite a bit during the winter, during like December into the end of January. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, my goals for training was really just to hammer the like strength and power thing, like I pretty much always do with my training. I tweaked some things a little bit, but I was really happy with the way that all worked out. And then I went to this area in Central Texas that I've been to twice before. I first went in 2018. A really good friend of mine, Cody Roth, used to live in Texas. Now he lives in Italy and works for Vertical Life, which is a company that owns 8A. He's a really good guy, and I've known him for a long time. He was on the scene forever. He lived in Austria for a bit, did like the World Cup scene, and he moved to Texas somewhat randomly, and then he really kind of helped bring to light some of the really hard, short sport climbing that's in Central Texas, because there's quite a bit of it actually. And I just thought it was like so funky and different, and I hadn't really seen anything like it. And I don't like go bouldering very often ever anymore. I used to boulder a little bit more, but I always try and integrate some like, 20-foot sport routes into my climbing year because I think it's like, it's a way basically you can go bouldering and then you don't have to like shuffle pads around and deal with like, falling on your ass and stuff like that. So
Right.
I'm really into it actually. I really like, assuming if I'm prepared right, I really like the like super short sport routes. So yeah, man, I was down there for about 3.5 weeks, just enjoying the hell out of the food and like the whole scene. I really enjoy Austin as a city. And then, within like an hour or an hour and a half kind of circumference of Austin, there's a handful of crags. There's some pretty damn good bouldering. There's some pretty cool like hiking and exploring to do. And it was great to be down there for a while. So yeah, it was great.
I want to maybe peel back on a little bit of that, but the kind of the theme, if there was a theme for this conversation here that I wanted to explore with you, is around like success and failure and how we define success and failure. And I saw as you shared some posts at the end of 2023, there's some pretty thoughtful words that you were sharing and really kind of with this overall theme that like you just learned a lot last year. It was like seemed like it was just a big learning year for you.
It's funny. I've had a lot of friends and I've talked to a lot of friends. It feels like 2023 was quite transformative for like almost everyone I know in like kind of a weird way. And it feels like a difficult year for a lot of people that I'm close to at least. And a lot of like transitioning happening and big learnings. And that's definitely the case for myself. So I think the ambition and the expectation is a good place to begin because then when you fall short of those things, that's when you feel like maybe you failed or like that things have not gone your way.
Mm-hmm.
So my real ambition, several ambitions, but one was to secure a visa to live in Europe long term, which I did. So Shane and I got married in April and we got a really special visa with like after like many hours of paperwork, and I hired a consultant to help do this stuff and whatever. But we basically got 4.5 years of residency in France. So we can come and go as we please to the EU now, which is awesome. My first climbing trip to Europe was 2012. And since then, I've spent a good chunk of time there, probably, I would say on average, like 4 months, 2 to 4 months in Europe, almost every year, something like that,
Yeah.
And I always kind of had this feeling, well, one thing, I always had this feeling of like time pressure, like, oh, the trip was coming to an end, oh, I've only got 8 more climbing days. And then, there's a bad weather day. So it's actually 7. And then, oh, my skin's bad. So it's actually 5. I just kind of felt like that was really tiring for me.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it also started to feel really hard for me. Like if I genuinely wanted to like take my climbing to the next level, for me, that would mean climbing 9B plus. I'm a bit like the tortoise, I'm not so much like the hare, I'm a bit like the tortoise in that, like, I kind of just try and take baby steps, like, all the time. I'm not like some outrageous talent in one regard to climbing or whatever. And I don't very frequently do things like fast. I'm really just like about like the method and just going slow and patiently. And so all of this in my mind, this enjoyment of the like European climbing lifestyle, how many opportunities there are there to climb hard routes, and then also feeling like I wanted more time and less time pressure led to us going for this kind of like long-term lifestyle thing that we are going to try and do in Europe. And so we secured that. And I was actually in Europe for 8 months last year. So I did like almost 2 months in Spain in the spring in Santillana. And then I went back in May to France and I was there until the end of November. So it was like a big chunk. It's definitely the most time I've spent in Europe ever for over the course of 1 year. So yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, I had this dream of living there and I had expectations about what opportunities that would provide me with that I didn't have on these short trips. And then, on top of that, from like a raw climbing perspective, what I really wanted to do was to have the opportunity to try 9B plus in a way that I hadn't had like an opportunity before.
Sure.
And yeah, the results were very different than like I had hoped. Ultimately, it was a difficult year, not because I gave up on the idea of climbing 9B plus, but because I had kind of had this like almost lifelong dream of living in Europe. And I think what I realized is that at least for me in this stage, in this age in my life, it actually is not the way. and it's kind of difficult. It was like heartbreaking in a way to feel like, so, when you're so convinced of something and so convinced that something is going to be like you're like, oh, this is it. You're like, oh, this is clearly what I have to do. And it's clearly the way to move forward. Then to have it, to have that thing turn out to be actually not what you had expected. And in a lot of ways, like really difficult, where you thought it was going to make your life so much easier. And I won't get into too many details about all that, but I will say that on the surface, the reasons why is because I think that there is like a support system that I've created for myself over all these years in the United States that is really helpful for me. And I think there's three really main things that Shane and I both felt this, that we really learned over the course of that big, for me, 8 months, for her, about 5, that really help empower us to be our best. And that is, first and foremost, and this sounds like, I almost sound like lame for saying this, but dude, climbing gyms and training access, like, it's horrible in France. It's so bad. Like, the gyms that do exist, well, we also lived in a part of France that was far from any like metro area. So, but even when we went to metro areas to use the gyms, there's no temperature control of any kind. So, I mean, we went to gyms in the summer, and like, this is not a joke. Like, there would be a thermostat on the wall and it would say 86 degrees in the gym. And I was like, do you guys have any kind of HVAC in here? Like, is there a fan or something?
I mean, God, it's crazy. What the hell are people doing out there, man? Like, Europe's putting out crushers after what's Seb Boyen doing out? Like, he's got like some private temperature controlled gym that he's not letting anybody into?
He definitely does have his own facility in his mom's house near the Verdun. And then he lives I believe he still lives in Montpellier. So I think that there is a better gym there, which was a few hours away. Like, I'm not saying that these things don't exist. And especially if you get into like the German speaking countries, like Austria, Switzerland, Germany, they're on a new level. Like, their stuff is amazing. And we also went to London for 2 weeks in the middle of the summer just for like honeymoon stuff. And we went in the gym a couple times. And those gyms are way better. Although I have to admit, still not like temperature controlled. But like, it's all just to say that like, it felt really difficult for me to keep my level at where I wanted it to be.
Yeah, I mean, for what you need to, because it's a personality thing, right? Like, you're someone who has consistently shown that you're passionate about your training blocks. I had a conversation with Tommy yesterday, and he went into a training block not too long ago and kind of discovered, as he may have shared with you, like, it really wasn't for him. He just wants to be outside and on rock just as much as possible. I think Chris Sharma would fit into that camp. But then, many others, and yourself included, I think, whether it's our personalities or what, like, we'd like to punch the clock and get out and like try hard on a board or whatever. And so if all of a sudden you're out in this place and you don't have access to that, and it's not filling your cup, regardless of whether other people could go train somewhere else or in some other way, like, that was a big thing that was missing from your lifestyle, that you weren't, I'm assuming you weren't expecting to like feel that void when you went out there. You were like, you just thought you'd be able to train.
Yeah. I say all this, and I'm still climbing outside over 200 days a year. So it's like, climbing outside is my focus, obviously. But I think that I really lack in strength and power. And most of the objectives that I have require some level of strength and power, but they're ultimately like, 40-meter routes and saves. So I tend to, like, if I'm just hammering at the crag constantly, I'll just keep moving in that direction of like stamina. And like, I might improve my workload capability. My stamina might get better. I might feel really fit. But yeah, I just have found that the most effective way for me to get like some level of strength and power, like maintain some level of strength and power, is to have like a weekly hard gym training session. That's kind of all I need. Once a week or once every 2 weeks is enough for me to feel like I can like maintain for a while. And unfortunately, it just felt really, really hard for me to keep that level there, which was kind of the first bummer. And then the other two, which I'll try to make a little more concise. But the second one is that I have an incredible, I'm 38 years old and I've been pushing hard for a long time. And I always understood the resources I have here in Las Vegas, for instance, for like body work and massage therapy and physical therapy. But man, then taking those entirely away when you're hiking, an hour every day with a pack, and then you're trying really hard and you're like staring down 40 years old and you've been pushing for 25 years straight, you're kind of like, oh, wow. Like if I don't have access to these things, I can go 2 months or 3 months, but like at some point I can do all the stretching and like self care that I can. But man, I had an impossible time finding someone that I felt could really do beneficial body work and manipulation. I finally did find somebody. Sadly, they're in Chamonix. They're amazing. Her name is Christy. Shout out to me if you need her contact. She's awesome. She's a Rolfer. But she's in Chamonix. She's 3.5 hours away. So it's like,
Right.
what am I going to do? Go there every week to get body work done? It's like, And so, yeah, I felt like somehow my level was deteriorating and also my body was getting like, totally like hammered from all the try hard. And then lastly, like our friends, like our group of, like, you know what it's like here in Vegas. Like we have a really close community. We have solid climbing partners basically any day of the week that you need them. Everyone's so ambitious to go outside. People are super psyched. And yeah, it's just this group of people that we've spent, sometimes decades building relationships with. And we made some new friends in Europe that we will be lifelong friends with for sure. But still, there were definitely moments where it felt like quite lonely. But ultimately, it was just an amazing learning experience. And we are going back, right? It's not like we're not going to go back. Like we're going to go back. I think that it really made it difficult for me to achieve like the climbing goals that I had. And I really came up short on that trip of what I had really aspired to do.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we often, and I'm guilty of this as I'm the host of this podcast, we often tend to exclusively look at our experiences through the lens of climbing, training, and performance and this kind of thing. But so much goes into our performance that's outside of what we're doing when the rubber's on our feet.
Totally.
But also, I think it's relatable because we all have our version of that, whether we're moving to France or just like dealing with shit at school or work or whatever,
Dude, totally. And I can't overstate, I think, how important just morale is on athletic performance, And I think we've all felt that for sure. Like when your psyche is high organically, you're in a new place and you're with like your homies and the weather's perfect. It just makes it easier to do your absolute best. And I've spent so many months in the truck when like the weather is horrible and you're kind of like climbing with totally random people and you've got like this skin is bad, but it's the last day you can try and blah, blah. And I pride myself on being able to show up in those moments and really like push hard. But I'll admit that like, especially the older I get, the harder it is for me to show up without kind of the foundation, without those foundational things that support me and prop me up to do my best. And, will I stop traveling or will I stop going to places where there's not an air-conditioned gym? Like, absolutely not. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. I think that, like I said, our expectations were that we would have like a new life, at least part of the time in this other place and really like dig in. And I think that that's still true to some extent, but I think that we found it difficult in ways that that were unexpected to us, And I think it's also just like, as you've been saying, relatable in that I put everything into my climbing. I change my life entirely. I sculpt everything around trying to make the best opportunity for me to perform, the best opportunity for me to do my best and show up and all these things. And like, dude, even like me and having tons of resources to be able to do that is like, even I can't make it happen sometimes, it's like sometimes you have a year where it's just like, it's just not going your way, and you got to like do your best to pivot and make the best of it and try and make it. And I think this is all arcing back to, I think ultimately what you want to get out of this conversation. And that is that there were definitely moments of last year where it felt like a failure, but man, the more time I have to reflect on it, the more things I feel like I learned from it and how I can like use those tools to better my next trip or my next ambition or my next year or whatever, it's more and more feeling like I actually genuinely feel like there are things about my life and things about how I would approach like projects or like a big trip like this in the future that I know I can do it better now, because I've learned the things that don't work for me. And as painful as it was at times in the moment, I'm actually really grateful for the whole experience. And both Shana and I, we've actually talked about this because she had a pretty difficult time too for other reasons being there. And we've both said many times looking back, oh, actually, I'm pretty psyched to go back. And oh, actually, like that was a good, there's things that are coming out of it that are awesome, but it's just, man, in the moment, it's hard to feel that way. We all just want to like kind of default to the negative.
I think we've all experienced that in one way or another. I certainly have. And my wife and I are the type that we make like snap decisions and we just go. Like we just like one day we were like, let's move to Connecticut. And we're just like, all right, we just moved to Connecticut. And then, we did it for a bit and it didn't work. Like we're like didn't work. And we didn't, we were too far away from our support network. And so we moved back to LA. But it wasn't a failure. We had this time together where we just were like nesting and supporting each other. And, we ultimately realized that it wasn't the right time, like wasn't the right chapter in our life to do that. And so we returned back to LA, but we took a lot away from it. And certainly with like a little bit more of lens of perspective, we got more and more out of it. Sometimes when you're in it, it's just like, it feels a little bit like a beat down.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, it can be the same with a long-term project or anything else. Like,
yeah,
when you're in it, it can feel like, why on earth would you continue? But yeah, most of the time, win or lose, there's something cool to be taken away from it by the end.
Well, that's a perfect segue. I appreciate you teeing us up because I do want to look at some of this experience that you had and just 2023 in general, but also like looking back, as you said, 20 some years, climbing really hard at the cutting edge of our sport. Sometimes we clip the chains or we top the boulder and sometimes we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And from like a green check mark on Instagram or some points on 8A or whatever, one might be categorized as a success or a failure, but we're much more three-dimensional than that. And I've been trying to put some more thought around this myself on essentially what's a success, what's a failure, what are my expectations, and what happens if I fall short of them as I'm projecting the hardest grades I've ever tried to climb in my mid 40s now, and knowing that I, likely won't be able to do that for many more years. I don't know. The Chuck Odets and the Bill Ramseys of the world give me some psych. So like,
totally.
I'm not throwing in the towel yet, but I think it's just an interesting concept. And you mentioned this goal of 9B plus 15C, right? It was kind of like on your mind as you were taking on this chapter out in France. And I mean, you've climbed incredibly hard on so many different types of rock and sent a lot of projects, but you probably also haven't sent a lot of projects, but we don't tend to hear a lot about those. So whether we want to look at it through the lens of this most recent goal or just looking back at whether there were nemesis projects that taught you a lot, but ultimately, or just still haven't gone, I'd love to explore how you've defined success and failure or how you look at that through the projecting process and if that's evolved over time.
Definitely evolved over time. I can say that in my 20s, I was much harder on myself. And I had a really strong internal voice because I never felt like I had that much external pressure actually at all until I do a little bit more recently. But like for the first 10 years of my climbing, it was all internal pressure. It's weird because like my parents were like really loving and accepting. They weren't like my dad and my mom, honestly, they were like the opposite from pushing me. Like I think a lot of people who have a similar experience, had like a Navy dad or something. But no, my dad was just like fully, there for me no matter what and whatever. But no, I don't know why, but I pushed really hard on myself and I had really high expectations of myself. And I felt I really wanted to be. I had this idea of like the type of climbing I wanted to be able to do and the type of person I wanted to be in regards to climbing community. And I felt like a voice always just pushing me to go farther, to do an extra pitch, to try the harder thing. to immediately start a new project after sending, things like this. And I
Right.
see it like this in a lot of, like, I hung out and did some climbing with Jorge. He's Spanish. He's unquestionably one of the
Just
best climbers in the
just did
world.
bibliography recently, right?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, while I was there, I was resting that exact day, but we were climbing together like for the weeks before, like leading up. I gave him the 15 blaze before he sent.
Sick.
And then he just did Sleeping Lion too, like a couple weeks
That's
ago.
right.
But he's a total
Yeah.
beast. Yeah. And man, he has a drive, dude. I can just feel it just being around him. Like he just, we'll get down from a long climbing day. I mean, it was hot and we got kind of boned with conditions. So we were climbing a lot at night. And say he was, we get down and it'd be like 11 and he would just like text me at like 1 a.m. and be like, I just finished hayboarding for 90 minutes. And I was like, oh my God, you're savage. But it's cool to be around that energy, because I had that energy, like definitely, I wasn't nearly the climber that he is, but I had that energy too when I was in my 20s. And then, yeah, I think as I've grown older, I've found a better balance of like, well, there's so many more things going on in my life than then. Back then I only had to be concerned with climbing and that was it. And now I have like family and house and like all this other stuff, which I love. So it's a bit of a balance, but I think my internal voice is a little better. To get back to the question that you actually asked, though, I think that when I think about like the definitions of success and failure, my intuition is to say that the only real failure is when you give up. And even then, I feel like I can break apart that statement and say that and excuse me if this gets a little too like, wishy-washy, but I feel like the only real failure is when you're not true to yourself and maybe you push a little too hard based on what other people might expect of you or want out of you, or maybe you give up before you give up because of other people as well, like because of the needs of other people, or because of the needs of like your most superficial self.
Sure.
Like it's too cold, or I'm experiencing pain, or I'm suffering, or whatever. The way that I would define real failure is, I guess, just not being authentic to that most inner part of yourself. And then that begs the question, or leads to the next statement, that in order to not fail, you have to have a pretty intimate understanding of what you really want, and that requires a lot of introspection. And I think a lot of like thoughtfulness that probably is hard for a lot of us to reach. But I mean, everything else, I think every other form of like failure can be made positive and can be like a good thing. So is it really a failure? Probably not, in my opinion.
How do you, for yourself, explore and define what it is you really want?
Man, I mean, I think that's just different for everybody, right? Like,
Yeah.
And I think that it arcs back to this idea of just having really pure motivations, which we've all had really pure motivations. We've all had very much like tainted motivations before. I mean, I don't know any climber that hasn't like wanted to send a route to like dunk on their friend, that was there, or like dunk on their enemy, or whatever it is. It's not to say that we don't like ride the line between knowing what we want and what our real goals are and what we want to get out of climbing, and not knowing those things. But yeah, I think that just being aware of it is like a first step, and kind of really having the time. And I feel like to bring back in the earlier part of the conversation, I feel like last year for me was like a perfect, like it just felt like a total destruction of ego, having certain ambitions and a certain like maybe even understanding of like what I could do or who I was and the types of things that I could handle and this kind of stuff. And then having a lot of that like kind of, dissolve. Then you have this space to be like, man, fuck, what really is, what am I really here for? Like, what am I really psyched about? Because you want to build something, or at least that's my like disposition, is to want to build something back up, right? Because I feel like everything's been torn down. I'm like, okay, well, I gotta remember, like, why am I here? What gets me psyched? What types of things do I want to do? And so, yeah, I mean, maybe the answer is to like kind of, bump into your limits, whether that's like emotional or physical or mental or whatever, and then destroy the ego and then have the space to think, to really come to terms with like, okay, what is it that I want out of this, and why am I here, and maybe that's the answer. I have no idea.
Yeah. It sounds like an uncomfortable way to get an answer. Maybe I'd just rather eat like a handful of mushrooms and destroy my ego. And
Yeah, there's got to be a way to vision quest this too, and
Right.
do some steps.
do I have to put 100 days into a project before I come face to face with my real self? But actually, I want to explore that, because I think that because the amount of time that you put in on routes and on pushing the top end and on pushing yourself, and have done for so many years, I'd love to take a look at some case studies, kind of take it from the general and the esoteric right now into maybe some specifics. Like nemesis projects, maybe one that has gone and one that hasn't gone. I'm in my mind, I'm thinking maybe Stoking the Fire. It seems like kind of a recent example of one that like came together in a pretty rockin' Hollywood way. It seemed like I don't have an example top of mind of one that hasn't. I've heard you talk about in the past about like a project in the Finns maybe that you put a lot of time on that hasn't.
Totally.
But you have more of this in mind than I do. So I'd love to explore kind of the two sides of that coin.
Oh, for sure. I think that's a great conversation. And yeah, I just think it is really important to communicate like that. I've had a lot of projects that just didn't do, and that I'm not sure that I ever will do, but it's just, you just only see the rad stuff, and it's, I think every single pro climber has stories like that. I mean, maybe not every single one, but a lot. But yeah,
Sure.
to speak to the two routes you mentioned, I think that's a great segue. Yeah, so I'll start with the Finns project first, which is it's timely too, because I'm actually going back to try it in June.
Sick.
So it's I bolted a route in the Finns that is called Algorithm. I built that in 2012. It's a 9A route. It's like really spectacular. The rock's insane. It's 40 something meters long. It's just basically 10 degrees off vertical or something. Really hard and really thin and really technical and just awesome. It's the kind of climbing I was obsessed with in the 2010, 2011, 2012. Like that was like my jam. But
Right.
now I just am like a cave person. So that kind of climbing is really hard for me. So I'm definitely really nervous about going back to it. But so I had the season in 2012 when I did Algorithm. Then I went back to the Finns in 2015, and I kind of envisioned this direct start to Algorithm. And because right now, the way the Algorithm, it climbs this 13A called Son of Discovery, and then it basically like traverses a bit and then goes up to the top of the wall. Okay. So then I saw this line here that would basically come directly in. So you skip this 13A. And if I'm honest, like, I mean, this happens all the time. It's like when Tommy bolted Kryptonite and he thought it was going to be 12D. I bolted like this direct start, and I was kind of like looking around. I saw some edges. I understood the Finns climbing pretty well, and I was kind of like, oh, this could be like 13 plus, So it could, like, I was thinking, oh, maybe you would like maybe tip Algorithm over into the 15A like level, but I wasn't totally sure. And then in 2015, I ended up like started to climb on the direct start, and then realized after like one session, I was like, oh my God, this is so hard. So there's no way that I'm going to climb this into Algorithm. So I'm just going to put an anchor here. And then I basically like went in on that as its own independent project. I sent that route's called Malaleche. That's 14D. Then I was thinking, all right, well, these routes are both really hard, but there's probably a way to connect them. So I went back a couple seasons later. I found a way to connect the two routes. I bolted that. It's really obvious. It's not like it sounds like there's just a mess of bolts everywhere, but it's really clean and it makes perfect sense. And actually the climbing is sick. So it like goes through the crux of Malaleche, and then you do probably like at least V8 and you join algorithm before any of the hard climbing. So it's like
Crazy.
totally insane. But I was like super psyched by it. And I started trying it that season. Didn't do it, but I got really motivated. Then I came back again and I started trying. And that was the year that Paige and her husband Arian were there. Paige totally smashed the Finns. She's like born for that place. It's sick to watch her climb there. She did algorithm. She did a couple of my other hard ones like Catalyst and Mind Over Matter and stuff like that. And Arian was trying Malaleche, and he actually broke just, I mean, it's like the fins, you know, so it's like just off vertical. He broke this piece of a hold. You like get this side pull, and there was like a little thing that your pinky could sit on, so you could kind of pull down on it a little bit. And he stepped on that and broke it. It's like literally like, I mean, it's hilarious, right? Because it's probably like, you know, like this big. But all of a sudden I was like, oh shit, this thing is even harder now. So basically I had to rework my beta through there. I couldn't do it the same way. I had to find a new way. So that's slightly harder now.
Yeah.
I wasn't even, I think maybe once I repeated Malaleche to the point when it started to go into algorithm, but I never made it through Malaleche and then the extra little bouldery section into, so I never made it into algorithm. Then I went back another season and I one hung it. I think, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I have notes, but I can look. I'm almost certain I one hung it. And I was doing algorithm like maybe 60% of the time, like as like a, you know, just, and it, when I was trying to do links and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the moral of the story is that if you consider the time I spent on those both independent routes and then the time on the whole thing, I think it's been 5 trips in total. And I've done other things too while I was there, but I mean, there's no question in my mind. One of the trips is probably only a week or two. Another one was a month, you know, but I would guess that I've probably spent 80 days or something on it.
Yeah.
Like if you include the time I spent on those 2 routes independently, it's so hard. And yeah, I mean, I think like on my last trip there, it felt like I was more or less at my emotional mental threshold. When I left, it was definitely in a fury, and I was kind of like, oh man, like I think I maybe got to the bitter end here, you know. The route's just really hard on its own, and then like, you know, when you get to that level for yourself, whatever it is, it's like then the weather becomes so critical, and this thing is like just sharp and so crimpy, and then your skin, and it's like the whole thing. So I kind of crumbled, and I was like, all right, well, more or less forgot about that. Went into trying and climbing a bunch of other things, including like did a couple other 9Bs, maybe actually 3 or 4 9Bs since I've been there, and a few other things. But yeah, I mean, I finally feel like I have the like posture, like the like confidence to go and try again. I mean, I don't know if confidence is the right word. I feel like I've had enough time away that I've basically forgotten how heinous and hard it is. That's pretty much what it is, really. Like I've had enough time where now I'm like, oh, I'm finally ready for a beatdown again. So I am going back this May and June, and it'll be really fun to like try and apply any new climbing ability that I have since the last time I was there. But I'm really nervous, if I'm honest. Like it's a style I don't climb much anymore, and I just know how hard it is. And so yeah, I'll try and build up some confidence between then and now.
Well, good luck. Have fun.
Thanks. Thanks. I need it.
Enjoy the process, all of this stuff. But you know, I'm curious when you put in that many trips, that many days, there's kind of a thought process that's both internal and external. And internally, you're probably asking yourself, am I getting anything out of this? Am I still psyched? Do I want to wake up and get out there and try these moves again? You know, if the answer is no, then it's going to be a pretty miserable experience, I'm assuming. Though we all have our bad days and you know, we need to push through. But then there's also the external where maybe it's Shayna or friends of yours or a coach that you've worked with or sponsors or any number of other things that might be saying like, I don't know, casting doubt in this kind of thing. I bring it up only because on a much, much, much smaller scale, I've been very public with my project that I'm working on here at the Red, and I'm really psyched on it. But it's like, you know, like I just keep falling off in the last couple of moves, and And so then I'll get like some comments on Instagram, or I'll get some people being like, are you sure, are you sure this is the one for you? Like, you keep going back
Yeah.
there. Like maybe you want to find something new. And then I'm like, oh, I don't know. Maybe I do want to find something new. And I'm like, no, I don't want to find something new. I'm having fun. And so like, there's kind of like internal doubt and there's external doubt. And I'm curious on your experience with this one, for example, like what have been those opposing forces in your thought process?
Well, I have to admit that I mean, there are probably people that I don't know about speculating to the fact that I won't do the rooters. But to my face, everyone's really supportive, man. So in that regard, and online and whatever, people are really supportive. So I feel grateful for that.
Cool.
So I don't necessarily feel like that much external doubt. It's mostly internal. And I think it's just, I've learned more and more. It's really important to show up physically prepared and to have a period of physical preparation for something like this. But it's also so important to show up mentally prepared. And this is a great transition because the way I learned that lesson, I've learned it, incrementally over the years. But the way I really learned that lesson was like on my experience on stoking the fire.
This episode is supported by Boulder Bear's caffeinated gummy bears because climbing should be fun, you guys, and nothing says fun like crushing some gummies so that you can then go crush your project. Man, I love these things so much. I've been using them for a while now. They are friggin' awesome. I love that I can perfectly dial in the energy boost that I need right when I need it. So like, if I'm about to hit a limit bouldering session over at my gym or trying to PR my hangs, I'll have 4 or 5 Boulder Bears, and then 20 minutes later, I am ready to rip some holds off the wall. Or on the other side of that, if I'm out for like a long day at the Red or I'm doing some multi-pitch, I'll have like 1 or 2 an hour, and that's just enough to keep the energy and the focus leveled up. Each Boulder Bear has 20 milligrams of caffeine plus collagen, so you can stay energized, focused, and take care of your fingers all at the same time. It's a small company. I know the owner, Matthew. He's a great guy. He gives 5% back to climbing nonprofits, and honestly, it's just the best and most fun way to get a caffeine boost. You can pop by thestruggleclimbingshow.com/boulderbears to try them out, and use code STRUGGLE when you go over there because you're going to get yourself a free travel pack plus 15% off your order. It's cheaper than Red Bull and way, way better. Hit that link in your notes to check it all out. Boulder Bears, all flash, no crash. This episode is brought to you by the Force Board. Are you guys into training your fingers? Dumb question. You're a climber. You're obviously obsessed with your finger strength. And let me tell you, the Force Board is just a huge step up from hangboarding. Now, if you're not familiar with what a force gauge is like this, it's a little digital device that you connect to your phone. And then as you pull on a block or a portable hangboard, it tells you exactly the force that you're using. So you don't need to mount a hangboard on a wall, you don't need to hang weights or pulleys to get the desired training stimulus, and then you can track your data seamlessly and program your workouts right in the app. And training fingers this way, instead of doing weighted hangs, reduces injury risk and also speeds up recovery between workouts. So I've been using one of these for months now. It is super portable, so I can easily bring it to the gym and to the crag for my warm-ups. And then I'm also using it to train up my endurance right now by doing 7-3 repeaters at 60% of my max, which is so easy, you guys, to program because the app just gives you a target to hit on each pull. And so as soon as I don't hit that target, I know that my session's done. Boom, that's it. I don't get injured. I don't get overly fatigued. I recover faster. With the Force Board, you can train anywhere. It is the future of finger training. Hit that link in your show notes or just pop over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/forceboard and you can score 10% off your purchase by using code STRUGGLE at checkout. This episode is sponsored by Crimped. Crimped offers 75 different workouts created by world-class coaches and climbers totally for free, you guys. I've been using Crimped for years to log my finger strength and endurance assessments so that I can see how effective my training has been going. And I also love how easy and motivating it is to program my weekly training right there in the app with loads of proven workouts to choose from so that I can just keep things fresh. Look, if you're a self-coached climber, I am telling you, the absolute best and easiest way that I've ever found to train and stay on track is with Crimped. They group their workouts, y'all, into categories. So endurance, power endurance, strength and conditioning, boom, no confusion. I'm telling you, I use it all the time, and I am definitely far more consistent with my training when I've got the app keeping me honest and on track, and it just feels so good at the end of the week to close out those bars. You can hit that link in your notes or go to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/crimped, CRIMPD, to download it for free and take your training to new heights.
Last year, around this time, I was trying a route called Stoking the Fire, which is a 9B. It's in Santillana. Really hard though. Like on paper, it's 9B, but for me, it's so obviously the hardest route I've ever done.
Just because of the style of it.
It might be partly a style thing, although like if I thought about it, I'd be like, oh, this is a good style for me. I think one thing is that there's a low crux right away on the route that I just couldn't reach. And so I did have to find an alternative way to do this part. And it felt so hard. It took me forever to even do the move. And then sticking that move and then basically still having 99% of the route left over.
Right.
It was just like crazy. Yeah, it was. And then, yeah, I mean, on top of that, it's just a really hard route. I mean, the list of people that have done it is very short and they're all like the best in the world. And then a lot of really strong people have tried it like a bunch and been stymied by it. So I do think that it's just a very hard 9B. And on top of that, you know, for whatever reason, it challenged me to a level that I didn't expect. And I'll come back around to why this is meaningful mentally for what I was just talking about with like the Fins project. But first, I'll just tell like a quick story about the Stoking the Fire thing. So I went there actually in 2022 with the ambition to try Stoking the Fire, played with it a little bit. I was like, this is too hard. I mean, I was like, I think I could do this, but then it was that opening move that I told you about that I couldn't do the normal way. Basically, it's like this big drop knee. And I just couldn't reach from the feet to the hand. I just don't have the length. And so then I was like looking for another method and I finally found one and it adds a bunch of moves and it's all heinous. And I was kind of like, yeah, maybe. But at that point I had never been to Santillana and I was just like, screw it. I'm going to put this on the back burner, go in on all these other routes, try and learn the way of Santillana. And then maybe, you know, if I feel like I can have some success on other routes here, I can come back to try the hardest route in the cave. I was like, you know, I mean, as ambitious as I am, a lot of times I go with like this huge goal, but sometimes it's better to like pump the brakes and go back down a few notches to like just learn and be a student for a while and then come back feeling with like some confidence. So then I had an excellent trip, my best climbing trip of all time in 2022. Then I come back in 2023. I go in immediately on Stoking the Fire. I'm like very very clear focus because I kind of closed out most of the rest of the cave. So I have like one thing to do and I'm there to do it. And I just go in and I try again and again and again and again. And I make incremental progress. In the beginning, I make fast progress. Then it's a strength endurance thing. So things are just going more slowly. And it's like just beating my head, just utter destruction, just like bam, 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 making like the kind of thing where I'd be like, oh man, I don't know if I should try anymore. And then I'd show up that day and I'd have like my best try. And I'd be like, fuck. And then, you know, then I would go back to the drawing board. Yeah. And I had a pretty damn good situation. Like I was hanging with one of my best homies, Drew Mack, and my friend Ryan White came out to do some filming. And we've got another one of my really good homies who lives in the area who's like, his name is Paul. He's like basically like the governor of the whole zone. And there's like this great gym. Basically all the things are set up for me to like do well, you know? And yeah, in the last week of the trip, I got to this place where I was like one hanging the route every try. I was, you know, like every 4 days, I would like get one move higher. And I only had like 3 moves left to do, you know?
Oh my God.
So it was just so hard to give up because I felt so close. But at this point, I was completely fried. Like I had tried the route and only that route, essentially. I think at this point, it was like over 5 weeks, just like that route, just like
wow,
going at it. So then it comes down to the literal last day of the trip. And every day after climbing, I like unpack my bag. I just like, I don't know why. I totally unpack it so that then I don't forget anything the next day because I'm packing it all.
Right.
But this day I had only remembered I had several pairs of climbing shoes, but I only remembered one of the like good pair. I had this OG pair of Testarossas that was perfectly broken in. I only had like one. And so I was like, oh, fuck. I was kind of blown emotionally at that point. So I was just like, whatever, I'll just try it in this other like old big pair that I have. And then went up and had a terrible try. And like, oh, fuck, I need the good shoes. And at this point, because I had waited until the very end of the day, because that's what I'd normally done. So at this point, it was like 7 or 6:30. And last day had one climbing shoe. I've got an hour and a half left to give a try. And I was like, in a fit of rage, I was just like, I didn't know what to do. And I'm just like, fuck it. So I just run to the car, jump in the car, drive 40 minutes round trip to our house, run up into the apartment, grab the other shoe, run down to the car, drive the car back, run back to the crag. I get there. There's like 20 minutes of light left. And I'm just like, fucking put me on, And like Drew comes over and I tie in and I just like go up the route and I do it.
Let's go.
And it was like the most outrageous thing, like the most insane ending to a trip, like the most like crescendoed, like crazy emotional explosion of a send that I've ever had in my life. Like, it's funny because I think we talk a lot in climbing about how like you have to push so far, and I talk about this too. There's no way to like shortcut it. You basically have to get so far that you completely surrender to the difficulty of a route. You have to push until you're just like, I don't even care how many more tries it takes. I'm just here, and like you're just like checked out from like the like counting tries or the like, ego aspects of like even wanting to send. It's more just like you just keep showing up until it happens, and once you crest the hill of realizing that, and again, you can't really shortcut it. You can't like go into a project knowing, oh, this is how I have to feel. It's like you just feel that way because you're so beat down after so long.
Right.
And that was definitely a part of it. But I also think that I still wanted the route in a way that was unusual. I felt like it didn't feel forced, but I was like, I really, really just wanted to climb this route. It just felt like it meant a lot to me personally, because there were so many times over the end of that trip, over the last 2 weeks, where I wanted to give up, where I was like, I should totally give up. Like, leaving the crag being like, dude, I've really given it a great effort. I'm proud of what I did. I got close. Like, I should give up. And then for some reason, like that night or the next morning, I'd be like, I can't give up. And it felt very like intrinsic. Like it didn't feel external. Like I didn't feel like anyone externally was telling me that, in fact, most of the people around me were like, dude, you had a great try. Like, don't push yourself too far. Like we love you. It's all good. You can stop. But for some reason, that voice is just like, you just have, and I think just going until the bitter limit and then having that experience of being able to kind of like show up for that part of me was so special. And I learned so much from it. To loop this all back into what I was saying before, I then came home 3 weeks, crazy schedule, insane, trying to do a bit of training, got married. It was awesome. We had an awesome wedding, huge party. Absolutely love it. I'm in love with my wife. It's great. Then we get on a plane like right away, go to Sayus. And now I'm like, oh, here I'm going to try the hardest route of my life, like it's something even harder.
Right.
And man, that spring season, I just didn't have it. Like I felt pretty amazing physically, but like mentally, I knew that I couldn't go right back to that place, And I actually ended up doing some climbing that I'm really proud of. And I climbed a route, Jungle Boogie, which was a really hard one, probably the hardest 9A plus I've ever done, and a couple other hard ones in Sayus. But like, the idea to go right into that 90 plus with like basically no rest, and then emotionally and mentally after all that shit that had just happened over the last 2 months, it was just clear to me that I just wasn't there. So what I'm getting at is that I think it's really important to show up physically prepared, but also mentally prepared. And I think that it's good to have some experience with like sub-limit routes before going on a big trip. But man, it's pretty damn hard to feel like you really push yourself to the mental, emotional limit and then immediately go into something that could be even more demanding. And that was, again, a huge takeaway that I had from last year. And then now going into like this fins project, I'm trying to think about that and to show, like, I want to show up with this, like, the mental fortitude to go in really deep, and try not to push myself too crazy in these next couple months. You know what I mean? Like, push enough so that I'm like sharp, but not go in something so deep that I feel like, I'm showing up with like my, like, heart level like way depleted.
Totally. That experience with stoking the fire, and congratulations, man. What a story. I mean, last
Thanks.
go,
Yeah.
last day.
Yeah.
That's like the dream. That's like when we're kids, shooting the 3-pointer, or the half court shot at the buzzer to win, out in the driveway or whatever. Like last go, last day is just like the coolest way to send.
I was so psyched. Yeah.
I mean, but also what you're saying here, it is fascinating because coming off of something like that, unless you get injured, which you didn't, you're going to be close to your physical peak. You'll have just done, one of the hardest things you've ever done. The fitness is topped up, everything's there. And in theory, it makes sense to be like, okay, now I'm going to jump over to the next hardest thing. But there really is this necessary, almost like healing or recovering or just refilling the tank, right? And you try really hard. I don't know if there's anybody out there that tries as hard as you. I've got a belt on my chalk bag that says "Try hard." It's got your name on it.
Sick.
And so
Yeah.
there isn't like a bottomless well of try hard, of like emotional capacity to be able to do that. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, and I'm curious, like, what your process is. Like, what does it take to shift to the next thing? Because you're a professional climber, it's kind of your job, right, to try to do hard things a lot. For those of us like myself that are weekend warriors, while my livelihood doesn't depend on it, I don't have a lot of time. So if I'm not kind of setting my sights on the next thing, I might go a year without trying hard on it. Like I only get out to the red once a week or something like that. So if I'm not projecting, if I'm going out and having fun, that's great. But I lose time very quickly. But even still, I need to have that period where I can like get re-psyched on something. And I'm curious, what that is for you.
Totally. Yeah. And I really like what you just said about, it's a great term to use because it's so true. There's like a healing period. Like I absolutely love that because it's like you're at war, I mean, really, and it's, if you were a warrior and you just like had this crazy epic battle and your opponent pushed you to the very limit and you felt like with your last breath you were able to like, finish your opponent or whatever. It's not like you'd immediately then turn and like try and fight somebody bigger. Right. You'd be like, dude, I need like a week of rest. And I think physically, mentally, emotionally, that's so true for something, especially, I mean, in the stoking the fire, that's like as deep as I've ever gone, like emotionally and mentally. So for me, it felt extra important. And then I didn't have any of that because we had this insane 3 weeks in between.
Right.
And then all of the tools that I normally use to like fill back up the cup in the psych, which would maybe be some like really motivating sub-limit routes, like if I've been like pounding my head against a 9B, maybe there's been like a 8C plus or 9A in the corner that looked beautiful, that would be like something to like be challenged on. But you know how different it is to feel like challenged, but on a route that eventually you're going to do versus the complete and utter unknown, being on a challenge on a route you might feel like you might never do. Those two things are totally different. And that's why really being at your limit versus being even just below your limit is so different, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like some of those things would normally fill me up a bit, but it's like the friends, it's like the experience outside of climbing, like, be it with friends, walking the dogs, seeing music, playing music, stuff like that. The gym and the training setting for me is an insane reset. It's just so easily mentally. It's like the most chill thing mentally ever, because basically 1 out of 20 gym sessions, I leave the gym feeling like, oh, that wasn't that sweet, or like I felt off or whatever. But 19 out of 20 times, I'm like, oh, that was cool. I feel good about myself. Like I did some stuff, you know, and that helps you to feel like you're making forward progress, helps the confidence, kind of just helps you like feel good about yourself and about like feel like productive, right? Like you put in 2.5 hours or 3 or 4 hours or whatever, and you're like, I got something out of it. It's a very clear exchange. And so, yeah. And then another thing is like body work. Like for me, feeling like I'm doing all the right stretching. I'm doing all the right, like kind of mobility work on my own. But then I also have these people or this resources around me that are helping me like heal, be the best version of myself. And so again, just to loop back to what we were talking about before, that's exactly why I feel like partially going into the trip in France, I was like, I just felt depleted, and it didn't really feel like I had an opportunity to get back to like my full mental and emotional physical capability until honestly until this winter, until I was back here in Vegas, because I was lacking all those things. So yeah, to answer your question, I think that it's about knowing like trial and error, and also just understanding the signs. Like this is filling me up, whereas this is depleting me, you know, like this is hard on me. This is easy on me, and taking a note of those things from an athlete perspective. And it's not like hard and easy. It's not like easy as you just sitting at the pool and hard as you like, you know, doing your hardest route. It can be like these exercises, this lifestyle, this level of challenge is easy on me, but it's maybe still helping me make forward progress. And then there's this one that's hard on me that might be, you know, pushing me to the very end, to the very limit. And it's unsustainable, but it's also an important piece if you truly want to, you know, keep improving and keep moving forward. And so I think it's all about just understanding what those two things are, and then knowing and hopefully having the opportunity and resources to like dip into one another based on like how you're feeling and what you feel like you need.
I love that. I love all of this. I mean, the perspective that you have from these long-term projects, but also, as you noted, like in 2022, you had the best trip of your life, and there were some like really fantastic, you know, kind of on the quick side ticks. Like we just go in these cycles where we can ride the wave, we can ride the momentum, and then say, okay, I'm emotionally, mentally, and physically prepared to basically get beat down for a while. And, you know, then that's either going to end in victory or in saying, not this time, or I'm going to walk away forever, or I'm going to come back for you in a year or two. See you soon. And we see Chris Sharma is returning to LeBlanc right now. I mean, nothing ever really goes away if you don't want it to go away. But I'm curious, maybe as like a last note on this, and then I want to get to a couple listener questions if we have a few minutes. But, you know, we talk often about, and we tend to admire, I tend to admire, but I think we as a community tend to put on a pedestal this notion of going to the death and, you know, trying really hard and leaving it all out there. And I'm with that, but I'm curious if there's another side to that. If there's a side to going to the death that you've ever experienced that's like too much, too detrimental, or, you know, has a negative impact on you as a person or as a climber. And is it okay to not?
Totally. Yeah. I felt that way a little bit on stoking for sure. I had moments of feeling like this is too much. Like I'm beyond a level of like to the death that feels comfortable or even positive. But then, like I mentioned before, I would have these moments in the middle of the night or when I woke up in the morning where there would be like a very like organic, just like presentation of this internal part of me that was like, you should keep trying. And it was a calm voice. It wasn't like, you know, it wasn't like a hateful voice or anything like that.
Right.
And so I think, again, in the same way that I kind of defined my own personal understanding of real failure before, I think in the same way, it's like, do your best to really know what it is, like know your true self and what you really want and what you want to get out of something. And if you start to stray away from that and it starts to feel like the pressure is, because sometimes, you know, there is an internal pressure that's more like hateful or almost like it's almost like self-destructive,
Right. Yeah.
And, we all have that feeling. So I'm not going to say that it's all bad. Um, there's probably moments of that where it's okay, but if it feels like that's all you have, then yeah, I mean, this is probably too far. And my guess would be that that's a perfect time to really analyze what it is that you're trying to get out of it, because it might be that in some really deep seated and messed up way, what you're trying to get out of it is just like a way to hate yourself. You
Right.
know what I mean? I mean, really. And so then if that's really it, if you're like, oh, the reason I'm here beating my head against the wall is because I want to hate myself, you're like, well, this is probably not healthy, like this is probably not to the death in the way that we want to talk about it. And so, yeah, I mean, the more aware you can be of your own motivations and where the drive is coming from and what it really means. And I'm not going to say that for me or for anyone, it's always pure because it can't be, but yeah, just being aware of that, I think you know, it becomes obvious when that voice or that like to the death motivation is a positive thing or is a negative thing.
Yeah, man. Well, really helpful and very thoughtful perspective there on all that. I really appreciate it. I know we gotta get going here. We're gonna shift into some bonus content for patrons and listeners and all their questions and all that. But first, I actually wanted to ask you about this thing that you're doing with Shayna. You got this course coming up with Shared Air where you're going to be mentoring climbers, and I know you've had some incredible mentors over the years in your climbing life that have made a huge impact on you. And so this just sounds so cool because it's a small group, it sounds like, that can work with you and Shayna directly and even climb with you. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing here with this course.
Yeah, totally. I am also really excited about it. So my wife, Shayna, she's a nutrition therapist, and I'm, an avid climber with 20 years of climbing experience, like trying to do my best. And this is the first time that we've really teamed up on something. We're working together with Shared Air, and it's a 3-month program that is a mentor program. The idea is we have the number of people really small. So it's not just like a cookie cutter thing that everyone gets the same program. It's like we've got 30 climbers limit maxed out. And then they get an e-course, which is basically like, we actually filmed it last week. We had like a film crew come along with me and Shayna to the crag. And we basically just did like a normal day of projecting. And we included all the details about like how we'd warm up, and then the nutritional side. So like how Shayna would fuel for different types of days of climbing. Cool. And then like some mental like tactics that I use and just like on the wall, like ideas about how to link different parts of the crux together, whatever. It should be really cool. Like that's part of it. So that's something you get, but then there is also hours of Zoom courses involved. So we're going to cover everything from like nutrition basics from Shayna's side of things to like projecting tactics to like even some kind of like training stuff from me, all in Zoom courses. And then we also have in-person stuff. So we're going to do like in-person clinics in the Colorado area. And at the end of the course, we even have like a little like weekend trip to Ten Sleep, which I'm really excited about because I'm actually going to be in Ten Sleep for several weeks on my own ambition to climb some of BJ's routes up there. He's got these 2 really hard new routes in the temple that I'm super psyched to go try this summer. So I'll be up there anyways, but I'm going to come and meet the group. And yeah, it's just a really cool and unique opportunity to try to offer mentorship to climbers from the perspective of like training, climbing, nutrition, all this stuff. Kind of try and cover like almost try and like build a foundation for everything,
Yeah, I love that.
Dude, yeah. We're psyched.
Cool. I'll have to check with Shayna to see if I can continue to fuel myself exclusively on donuts. And if she doesn't approve, then we're going to need an update to this course or peanut butter and chocolate chips. We'll see where that fits into her side of the course there.
Yeah, I think those 2 things are a recipe for success.
Oh, good. Well, then I'm in. Take my money. Buddy, great to see you again. I'm always so motivated and stoked by what you do as a climber, but also just like your ethic, your support for the community, how you give back, the bolting, all of it is just really inspiring. So thanks for doing what you're doing and also for taking the time today, my man.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. Dude, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat. It's fun for me, and I honestly feel like I get something out of it too, because it gives me a chance to to reflect and be introspective. And I think sometimes taking feelings and making it into words is like kind of the end of the process of realization, you know? So yeah, I really appreciate it.
All right, that clips the anchors on this episode here with J-Star. I am rooting for that guy. I know you all are too. Guys, it's just so damn inspiring for me to see like the human side of these legends of the sport here that I get to talk to. I mean, that's really one of the big reasons that I started this podcast in the first place, is that these crushers that I have on the show aren't all that different than you or me when it really comes down to it. We're all trying hard. We're dealing with success and failure and embracing the struggle along the way. And I'm just so psyched to be on this journey with you all. And huge thanks to J-Star for just opening up today in the way that you did. Appreciate it, buddy. And by the way, if you'd like to get more insights from Jonathan Siegrist, you got to check out the bonus episode that I just dropped for patrons and Apple subscribers. In it, J-Star talks about the boulder problem that got away and what he's planning to do to get back to it, the plateaus that he has hit over his career and how he has busted through them. So like if you're in a plateau right now in your training or your climbing, like I am, honestly, it is a must listen section. It's really enlightening stuff. He also talks about which training routine he used to make the leap into 515A, the greatest lesson that he learned from Tommy Caldwell, and so much more. He answers patron questions. It's all there, and I'm going to tell you more about it after this tiny little drumbeat sting. You can get instant access to all of that right now at zero cost with a free trial over at patreon.com/thestruggleclimbing-show or right there in your Apple Podcast app if you're an iPhone person. And you'll also, by the way, get instant access to more than 40 hours of other bonus content featuring Adam Andra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Alex Honnold, and so many more, plus the pro clinics that we've done on Stronger Fingers with Dr. Tyler Nelson, Advanced Bouldering with Allison Vest, Moonboard with Ravioli Biceps, and Performance Hacks with Hazel Finlay, just to name a few. It's all there for just a few bucks a month or zero cost right now with a free trial, so you can check it out. Thank you so much for supporting the show if you can. I'm working really hard for you here. Huge thanks and appreciation to our show sponsors who have brought you this episode at zero cost. Check your show notes for links and special discounts from those guys that are only available to Struggle listeners. And also you can see all of the show's brand sponsors and special deals by just popping over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/deals. The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation. Awesome. This episode was produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. You can follow along with the show on YouTube and Instagram at The Struggle Climbing Show, and you can also shoot me a note there. I'd love to hear from you. I hope training and climbing are going awesome, and if you're struggling like me, well, at least the struggle makes us stronger.